thanks, Dave, for organizing this and continue to try to work with us on this. So this is a project that with Jessica, Jose Luis, and BT, and Stephen Potkin that we started a few years ago. Mostly centered around how to pull neuroimaging data across different schizophrenia projects together so that people can ask interesting questions on schizophrenia. I would say that since we started this, it has been kind of good, the response from the user side. You can see the growth of the number of users over the years. These are cumulative plots, so a little bit of cheating going on, but it does show a total number of growth and downloads. Lately, we've hit a kind of a technical snag, and that's why you see some of the websites data sources here are down. Usually, we'd like to see them up in green. So today, what I thought we would do is to show you a little bit from the user side, what the user experiences when they use our website. And then Jess will take over and give you a view from under the hood about our data and schema and so forth. And then we'll end there and continue with today's webinar. So when the user comes to our website, the first thing that they could do is immediately go to data and query without even getting into the system to get a broad view of what's available. So for example, if I want to say, are there, how many male subjects with schizophrenia, broadly defined, that also has a structural T1 image. So down here, well, T1. That's scanned at, let's see, field that's scanned at, come on, 1.5T, let's just say 1.5T, some old data. And so the user will find out there are 19 subjects with 84 imaging sessions from the FBurn or 2 project. And so if the user is interested in getting the subject level data, then he or she could sign up, sign in, and go obtain that data. And so then they can go and download that data. But before they download, they could get a sense of what's in the data set already. So all these subjects, there's a little bit of a detail on them. And then they can go to proceed download, sign some data use agreements, and hit the download button. And the system will go to the data sources and collect the data. So the data are not living at SchizConnect. The data are living at FBurn's data repository, XNAV Central, and coins and so forth at different places. And when the data come back, so I have a little place here. Let's see. Let me just go to. You can go into my SchizConnect place, and here are the data that's that are all there. So this is kind of how the user interacts with our website. It's a query-based interface that allows user to. Our idea was if someone has a question about a particular kind of population, particular kind of imaging modality, they can go and query, and the query interface will reach out to different data sources and ask the same question, but using the data sources language for that, for the query at different sites, and then pull it all back and centralize it here to give it to the user. Okay, so Jess, do you want to then go?
Yeah, can you back up a little bit to the previous slide?
Here?
Yeah, that'll work. Okay, I turned off my camera because apparently my webcam is dying after 6 or 7 years. So it's jumping about and it was driving me nuts. All right, so what you can see here is an overview of how it works, how it's pulling from different data sources and mapping the schemas to figuring out how to actually take what the user is asking for, figure out how to query the different data sites and databases to get that information, and then return it. And that requires a great deal of harmonization of the terms, or both schema mapping and terminology mapping. Go to the next slide, if you don't mind, since I can't drive. There we go, got all that. Source schemas, query writing, right, okay. So for example, and I showed these as examples. Along the left column here is an example of 2 of our different databases. On the far right is the different names that those databases have for the same thing, of a T1 weighted structural image from different studies or different sequences or different across the data sets that are available in that data resource. And we had to, in the middle, we were trying to figure out what we want to call all of these so that when the user makes a request, we know how to interpret it and how to get all of the different data. And of course, the question is, we called it T1 and T2, but that is an arbitrary choice. And that's always the question, is this really what we want to simplify these terms to? That's where the harmonization comes in. Next slide. There are lots of other options. At the time, Radlex was becoming available as we were doing this. This is just a screenshot of the current version of Radlex, where they have information about their scanners and they have their nice ontology of how the imaging measures are taken. We found that this would probably be too much detail for the user. And more detail than is really needed for our particular cases. So sort of scoping the level of detail that we wanted, both from the users and for common requests across the different databases was really key. Next slide. Other options also included Neuralx, which I was a fan of. It's now Interlex or SciCrunch or something. And they have lots of options for what their various scans are, but they, again, it's not harmonized yet. You still have to, pick one and stick with it. So we just went with our own rather than grabbing an official term, and that's certainly a point of common work across all of these projects, is trying to say, okay, we know what we mean. How do we actually find a semantic term that is in common that other people can agree to, and that'll make everything much more interoperable? Next slide. We also had to do, so we did the same thing for the imaging data. Here's how it looks. Underneath MRI, we had, as Leigh gave an example, field strength, make, model, imaging protocol. The different imaging protocols could be structure, perfusion, field mapping, or functional. And then under this, giving you some examples of the different kinds of things we have. It's clear that this is not an extreme level of granularity, but at the same time, it's a bit more granularity than just saying, hey, it's an MRI scan. So again, you had to make sure it works. And then this is an example of how that is mapped to the different resources to say, okay, this is how we're going to actually ask for experiments and the equipment and the subject data and things like that. Next slide. And the same thing for this. I don't know, Leigh, did you want to say anything about these?
This creates the map between the central schema and the schemas that's defined at each data sources. So that's sort of
the heart of the mapping, the actual pulling the data back from the different databases.
Yeah. So for this, we had to come up with a centralized schema for other data sources to map onto.
Right. And then the same thing. Then we could take the query and rewrite it over the different sources of the data and identify where the data are and bring it all back and show it in that unified format that Leigh gave the example of earlier. I don't want to go through this in any detail. I don't think that's appropriate right now. We also had to look at cognitive data, and this is just a subset of the example. So again, On the left column is some of the different sources and data sets that we were looking at. On the right is what they were actually sort of measuring, or what they were called, and then what we mapped them to in the middle. So there are different ways of measuring attention, and this is something, you know, Russ Poldrak's Cognitive Atlas has gotten into a lot, is what is the relationship between the test and the underlying construct that it is attempting to provide information about. And this was just sort of part of it, saying, okay, we have attention, we have working memory, we have vigilance, etc. Next slide. There we go. So the neuropsychological data is not at all granular. And that's something that certainly the community could use a lot of work on, and we could probably pull from the common data elements that are out there now. Maybe we couldn't when we started this, but they've certainly improved in the last couple of years, so it's possible we could. But you can sort of see the breakdown of the different kinds of cognitive domains and then the different levels, and then within each, I believe we also had where do these tests actually fall. Next slide. We have the same thing for psychopathology, because it's not just cognitive measures, but also clinical measures. For each case, we have these data sets with different clinical assessments. What are those clinical assessments? What are they actually measuring? And we, again, had to make sort of executive decisions about exactly what level of granularity we're going to go for. Next slide. So we said, look, under clinical, we're going to deal with, because this is schizophrenia, we're particularly interested in the psychopathology as well as extrapyramidal symptoms that are separate from the positive, negative, and cognitive measurements in schizophrenia. We had lots of other measurements that might be more generic. Under the psychopathology, we needed to get into a bit more detail. These would not be relevant if we were studying a different disorder. And if you were just doing a certain type of schizophrenia, you might be interested in much more detail on what we were talking about with positive, negative symptoms. But we were just trying to sort of lay a backbone that could then be expanded as necessary. Next slide. And so as a result, we can end up running these kinds of queries that Leigh gave an example of, where we can pick the subject with their diagnosis, their scan, and a measure of executive function, for example, if we particularly want it. There you go. That's an example of it, and all the same information, along with the data use agreements ready to actually share the data with you. I think that's pretty much everything I had to say.
Okay, so the example I ran, because of our technical difficulties for today, I apologize, was only gonna pull data from FBurn, and FBurn 2 didn't have the clinical data in its repository. So, but if you were to pull the data, able to pull the data from coins, for example, this example on the screen shows that you will get things on the executive function, and those are the variables. So one of the things that we're currently missing, and with Jose Luis, we're trying to move forward on that, is a granular mapping on the variable level, so we actually truly have harmonized data. Because currently when people download the clinical and cognitive data, they're still in their original data study variables, and that's still making it hard to perform aggregated studies that will relate to these non-imaging parameters. So that's something that we're currently working on. And then so to return to the query data, the one last thing that I like to add is that now all the data downloaded from SchizConnect, despite their original data source organization, they're all gonna be in bits format. So that's gonna make things like automated computing, if they want to put these under BIDS app and so forth, will be very standardized that way. And a couple of other current directions that we're taking at SchizConnect, we're working with some folks at North Carolina that Jess and I are working with on data discovery based on similarity characteristics of studies, of instrument types, and things of that nature. So we'll have more, hopefully have more to report in the future. That's it from us, Dave.
Thank you. That's a great overview, and again, I think gives us all a nice level playing field for understanding sort of what the base functionality and design characteristics are that we can work together on.